My name is Mary, and this year, I'm approaching my late 50s. I have 2 children. My eldest son, now a working adult, is planning to marry his longtime girlfriend soon. My daughter, the youngest, is currently in college. Despite her busy schedule, she seems to be thoroughly enjoying her university life. With my children growing up and becoming more independent, I'm nearing the end of my responsibilities as a mother. Having previously worked as a nurse, I'm considering returning to the caregiving profession. One day, I received shocking news. My father-in-law, Bob, had suffered a stroke. My husband, John, called to inform me, and I rushed to the hospital where Bob had been admitted. Bob has always been a gentle and earnest man, and he's shown me nothing but kindness as his daughter-in-law. However, I'd been worried about him lately, ever since his wife, Alice, passed away 3 years ago. Bob hasn't seemed himself. I would visit him occasionally, checking on his well-being, but I often noticed his energy was lacking. We had been inviting him out with the kids more often, hoping to lift his spirits. Just when I thought he was beginning to regain some vitality, the news of his stroke left me deeply unsettled. When I arrived at the hospital, Bob's daughter, Isabella, and her husband were already there, engaged in conversation. "Sorry I'm late. How's Bob doing?" I asked, still catching my breath as I approached Isabella. She noticed me and sighed, her irritation palpable. "You're late. We have somewhere to be, so can you take over from here?" she said curtly before briskly walking out. Isabella has always been distant, treating Bob with indifference and coldness, much like she did with Alice when she was alive. Despite their kindness, neither Bob nor Alice ever confronted her, and I believe that only contributed to Isabella's behavior. For now, I nervously paced the waiting area while Bob was presumably still in surgery. Not long after, John arrived at the hospital. "Mary, how's Dad?" he asked, his worry evident. Sweat trickled down his forehead, soaking through his dress shirt. When I shook my head, indicating I didn't have any updates, John's face went pale, and he dropped the bags he was carrying. No way," he muttered, his voice trembling. I quickly reassured him. "No, he's still in surgery. We don't know yet." John seemed to relax slightly, picking up the fallen bags and sinking into a chair. "Should we prepare ourselves?" he asked, his voice heavy with dread. I rushed to his side, placing a hand on his back. "No, it's going to be okay." I wished I could offer more comforting words, but nothing else came to mind. A few hours later, the surgery was over, and a doctor called us into a small room to explain the situation. The surgery was successful. However, there will likely be some lasting effects, the doctor informed us. This meant Bob would need ongoing care. While I was relieved that Bob had made it through the surgery, I knew this would involve a discussion with Isabella and her husband. John and I decided to call Isabella to discuss the next steps. We agreed to meet at Bob's house while he was still in the hospital. As soon as we started the conversation, Isabella dropped a bombshell. "I'm not going to look after him," she declared, leaving John and me in shock. "Wait, if you're not going to take care of him, what are we supposed to do?" I asked, my frustration bubbling over. "I don't care, you two can handle it." My sister-in-law, Isabella, replied nonchalantly as she idly fiddled with her freshly manicured nails. Her husband, Tom, nodded in agreement, clearly backing her up. "What about considering a nursing home?" I suggested, trying to find a compromise. Isabella shot me a glare that could cut through steel. "Are you serious? I'm not wasting money on that. This always happens when I try to help." Her tone was sharp, and her eyes had a menacing glint. Feeling like my opinion wasn't welcome, I fell silent. "If a facility is out of the question and you both refuse to take care of him, what are we supposed to do?" John asked, clearly as exasperated as I was. "That's why I'm saying you should take care of him," Isabella said with a dismissive wave. "I don't need some decrepit old man bringing down the vibe in my house." She giggled, but there was nothing funny about the situation. Even my usual patience wore thin. "That's too much, even for you. He's your father," I retorted, unable to hold back my anger. "I don't care. Just because he's my father doesn't mean I'm obligated to look after him. Besides, he's John's father too. I've been saying all along that you two should handle it," she said with a shrug. Her cold indifference left me speechless. I would have loved to take care of him at home, but our house wasn't equipped for it. There were too many steps and uneven floors. If we took him in, we'd need to remodel the entire place, and that kind of renovation would cost a fortune, money we didn't have. "Mary, don't you have a care worker certification? It should be easy for you to take care of Dad, right?" Isabella said with a smug smile, as if she had found the perfect solution. I was at a loss for words. And I could see that John felt the same. Realizing we weren't going to get anywhere, we decided to leave and discuss things at home. What should we do? John asked once we were back, his voice heavy with worry. You were thinking about returning to caregiving work. John trailed off, clearly torn. That's okay, I wasn't completely set on it, so don't worry, I reassured him gently, trying to ease his burden. The real issue is the cost. I don't mind taking in your father, but our house would need significant renovations to make it safe for him, and medical equipment isn't cheap. You're right, I'd guess it could cost around $100,000, maybe more, to adjust the first floor for him to live on, John estimated, running a hand through his hair. We don't have that kind of money, our daughter is still in college, we're still paying off the mortgage, and the thought of taking out a loan for renovations is overwhelming, I admitted. I hate to say this, but maybe we should consider a facility after all. The problem is whether we can even get him into one. The waiting lists are long, and the costs aren't small, and you know Isabella and her family won't help. It feels like there's no solution in sight, John sighed. We decided to talk to Bob and get his thoughts on the situation. I went to the hospital alone to see him. When I entered his room, I was relieved to find him looking much better. He greeted me with a warm smile, his strength slowly returning. Sorry for all the trouble. My father-in-law would say this every time I visited. Why would you say that? I brought you one of your favorite books today, I replied, trying to brighten his spirits. The doctor had explained that the stroke had paralyzed the right side of his body, making it impossible for him to move that side on his own. When he read, he would place the book on the table and use a heavy object to keep the pages from turning on their own. Ah, thank you, he said, taking the book and placing it by his pillow. Dad, I came today because I wanted to talk about something, about what happens next. My father-in-law smiled warmly at me. Oh, I know, I'll be fine in a nursing home. I've saved up for it, so you don't need to worry. Despite his reassuring words, I could see a flicker of loneliness in his eyes. Well, Dad, if you're okay with it, why not come live with us? I've worked in elderly care before, and I'm at home during the day, so I have time. John's there too, let's all live together. The words spilled out of me as I saw the sadness in his expression. My father-in-law looked at me, surprised. That's a kind offer. He must have known deep down that returning to his own home wasn't an option anymore. The house where his daughter Isabella and her husband now lived didn't feel like his home anymore. I could only imagine how they would treat him as a burden if he went back, eventually pushing him into a nursing home. The thought filled me with sadness. I had intended to listen to his feelings first and then discuss the options, but my emotions got ahead of me. I felt a pang of guilt towards John, but I knew he would understand. Now, the challenge was figuring out how to manage his care before he was discharged. The biggest obstacle was the cost. I decided to consult Isabella again, so I headed home to discuss the situation with John. When he returned from work and I recounted the events from the hospital, he looked troubled but seemed to have expected it. He immediately called Isabella. The conversation between John and Isabella didn't go well. They argued on the phone, and John's tone grew increasingly sharp before he finally hung up with a sigh. John explained that Isabella had flatly refused to contribute any money, leaving us with no support from her. Faced with the reality of covering the costs ourselves, John and I started discussing how we would handle the expenses. Our house became a hub of activity as we talked about renovations, necessary care supplies, and home care logistics. When I told my father-in-law that he would be moving in with us after his discharge, he appeared both apologetic and relieved. Mary, could you get the checkbook from that bag over there? He asked during one of my visits. Curious about his request, I retrieved it and handed it to him. He opened the bank book and showed it to me. I have some savings here. Can you and John use this? He revealed an amount that took me by surprise, $10 million. My shock must have been visible because my father-in-law chuckled and said, "You and John will be taking care of me, right? I heard you're planning to get a new car and remodel the house. Will 10 million be enough for that?" 10 million. The number was staggering. I had no idea why my father-in-law had saved such a large sum, but after my mother-in-law passed away, he had focused on investments he had been studying. It turned out his investments had performed better than expected, and his savings had grown rapidly. He wasn't a big spender, so he had just continued saving. Even though remodeling the house or buying a new car wouldn't cost that much, I felt overwhelmed by the offer. I handed the bank book back to him, saying, "I can't accept this much, please use it for yourself." He insisted, offering the bank book back to me. "I can't use all this money, I'd rather give it to you and John, who are willing to take care of me." Caught in this ongoing negotiation, I declined again. I still can't accept so much. After thinking it over, my father-in-law proposed, how about $1 million? Seeing no end to the back and forth, I managed to persuade him to agree to a reduced sum of $100,000. He still seemed reluctant, but for now, it was a compromise. At that moment, Isabella walked in. Oblivious to the financial discussion we just had, I quickly returned my father-in-law's bank book to its place. Isabella noticed our hurried actions and, with a frown, asked, "What's going on?" Relieved she hadn't overheard our conversation, I explained that Isabella had come to bring some clothes for our father. After a brief chat, we both left the hospital room. On our way home, Isabella suddenly mentioned she had something to discuss and suggested we stop by a coffee shop. Her previous conversations had never been about anything positive, so I expected this one to be no different. Reluctantly, I agreed to her request, but it turned out to be a mistake. "I will take care of Dad," Isabella suddenly announced. What? I was caught off guard by her unexpected offer. By that point, we were already deep into preparations to accommodate my father-in-law, including starting renovations on our house. I was puzzled by her sudden change of heart. "So you won't have to visit the hospital starting tomorrow," she added. "No, visiting the hospital isn't connected to the caregiving responsibilities. There's no rule that says only the primary caregiver can visit," I said, skeptical of her motivations. I suggested we discuss this further at another time and left the cafe. When I shared the news with John at home, he seemed to make an immediate connection. She must have overheard about the savings. I had a hunch that was the case, John added. Otherwise, there's no way she would suddenly agree to caregiving, especially since she was so opposed to it before. I suspected that Isabella had learned about the money and was trying to position herself to benefit from it. She might even find a way to start spending it. "But what should we do?" I asked. "I have an idea. Let her try it out," John suggested with a sly grin, clearly up to something. Although I was uneasy about his plan, I decided to go along with Isabella's offer for the time being. I informed my father-in-law that he wouldn't need to worry about finances and that Isabella would be taking over his care. His response was ambiguous, a vague expression that didn't clearly indicate whether he understood or not. With that, the conversation ended. After his discharge from the hospital, my father-in-law returned to his home in Nebraska, where Isabella lived. When I visited their house to inspect the conditions, I found it in a disappointing state. There had been no renovations, and it was unclear whether there were adequate caregiving supplies. I doubted whether proper care could be provided under such conditions. However, as this was Isabella's choice, I decided not to comment. 2 months later, Isabella called me in a panic. "Mary, I can't do this anymore. Please come over right now." Her frantic tone left me no choice but to rush to the house in Nebraska. When I arrived, the house was in disarray, and a foul odor permeated the air. As I tried to assess the situation, Isabella appeared, looking exhausted and disheveled. Dark circles under her eyes and an unsteady gait made it clear she was struggling. "Are you okay?" I asked, concerned. Isabella grabbed my hand and said, "Take that away." Initially, I didn't understand what she meant, but after calming her down and getting her to explain, it became clear she had underestimated the challenges of caregiving. She was overwhelmed by the responsibilities, which included assistance with walking, meals, and incontinence care, including dealing with diapers. She was struggling to manage the household and even take care of herself. I told Isabella that I couldn't make any decisions immediately and promised to get back to her as soon as possible. I took the matter home to discuss with John. 2 months is quite a feat, John remarked as he looked at the calendar. Clearly having anticipated this, he suggested we go pick up my father-in-law on his next day off, and I agreed. A few days later, when we arrived at the family home in Nebraska, my father-in-law was packed and ready to leave. I felt a wave of relief that we could finally bring him home. As we were helping my father-in-law into the car, Isabella abruptly said, "I've endured 2 months of this, and since I used to live here too, I deserve at least $5 million. Her unexpected demand made me stop in my tracks. John was equally startled and turned to face her. Isabella maintained a smug expression, seemingly unbothered by the situation. "What are you talking about, Isabella? This is neither the time nor the place to discuss money, especially in front of Dad. He raised us, after all." John tried to reason with her, but his words had no effect. "I'm his daughter. It's only fair that I get paid," Isabella insisted. Her boldness left me questioning her sense of entitlement. "Enough, Isabella. This isn't the time for such discussions, and besides, you've already received money," my father-in-law interjected, looking both surprised and disappointed. There's none left. Just give me the $5 million. What's so hard about that? If you're just going to fade away, you might as well make it worthwhile, Isabella continued, her audacity leaving me speechless. Even John, usually calm, was visibly furious, his face reddening as he glared at her. John, it's all right. Isabella is speaking the truth. Bob, my father-in-law, said gently to try to calm his upset son. He then turned to Isabella with a stern look. Isabella, you are no longer my child. Leave this house. His tone was cold and final. Isabella stood frozen in shock. What are you talking about? I'm your only daughter. I only have a son, and this kind and caring woman here is my daughter-in-law. I don't know you anymore. Take your foolish husband and leave. I had only ever seen Bob's softer side before, so his harshness was startling. His eyes were resolute, and even Isabella seemed subdued by his authority. Well then, shall we go? We're counting on you to move forward, Bob said. His earlier icy demeanor softened as he smiled at me. John and I had no choice but to follow his lead. We drove home, leaving a stunned Isabella behind. Bob later arranged through his lawyer for a will that stipulated his inheritance would go solely to John, ensuring Isabella received nothing. Although the house became vacant with Isabella's departure, John and I were happy to move in, and Bob was pleased to oblige. Isabella and her husband moved into an apartment. They had evidently spent a significant portion of Bob's money even while he was in good health. Their extravagant spending had led them into debt, and now they struggled to pay it off daily. I believe this was the inevitable result for someone like Isabella, who failed to respect or repay her parent. While caregiving for Bob is challenging, my experience in the field makes it manageable, and we're able to maintain a good relationship.